You both talk about the tension and the trade-offs that are part of the reality of living in a foreign land. I would imagine those tensions and trade-offs were also extremely character building. What are some of the positive traits you see in your children that you think are a result of growing up overseas?
It's a great question, Chuck. I think one of the things that I see in both of our kids, and they're very different. One's an engineer, no question, that's how he thinks, maybe a little square. And our other, Sarah's quite creative. One of the positive things that I see in both of them is a willingness to adapt and understand others' perspectives. They are able to quickly engage in a community or in a group of people and feel, I think, comfortable. They look like they're comfortable, and that's not true for everyone. They're also quite comfortable speaking with adults, also speaking with younger kids, and so they have this ability to take the age ranges as well as the setting ranges and really plug in and feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's good.
I love that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Jen.
I think we would say the same. You know, we've had our children for long periods of time, and certainly I would say they're adaptable. You know, I remember, I love that you addressed this in your poem, Joanna, but I remember the first couple of times we took our children overseas, and when we come back, people would be so in awe that I would put them in danger like that. And so, how did you approach people? Because you said you were surprised yourself, you were going on the mission field, right? So what were your friends and your family like? How did you handle explaining to them the call that God had put on your life and taking your family like that? Because I'm sure that was a surprise to a lot of people, as it was to you, right? Yeah.
I think, I mean, this might sound trite, but we just said this is what God has called us to do. And we had loads of people here in the U.S. praying for us and cheering us on and saying, we will hold the ropes for you here.
Good.
And by God's grace, we were protected from all kinds of scary snake bites and other things that could have taken place there in the middle of the jungle where we were.
Sure. It is dangerous, right? But it's worth the risk, right? To follow what God's called us to do.
You know, Keir, you mentioned this in your talk, but I want you to elaborate a little bit more because you've experienced tension on both sides. Both there, the tension, you know, overwhelming need, never having sleep sometimes. How do you do it with your family? You know, you're isolated from other people. You don't have help when you need it. But you've also had tension here. You practice surgery some now here, and because a lot of people can relate to tension. How do you deal with it here?
Yeah, so it's I think probably the way that we can look at tension, and I'll take this maybe just out of the professional realm just for a moment and back it up, and that tension resulted in us feeling like we weren't home in Gabon. It also reminded us when we came here, back here, this doesn't feel like home anymore either. And so dealing with that tension, part of it is having that eternal perspective, and I don't mean to like be too spiritual here, but it's true that we ultimately remember that our ultimate home is in heaven. And so handling that on a broad scale, I would say is that big picture of saying home is in heaven, and this isn't home. On a more day-to-day scale, it's keeping the eye on that prize that God has called us to. And there may be things in my position, what I'm doing with PAX now, that are challenging to be here. There may be things that are challenging in the hospital where I'm working. But I know that God has called me to a specific mission. And if I can be reminded of, okay, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm doing. It's about discipling. It's about training. That's why I'm here. It's what I'm doing. Coming back to that calling.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. How has it changed your kids' worldview?
Yeah, so you want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. I would say one of the aspects for them is they seek out a diverse experience. They're looking for that. They're not afraid of it. They're not forcing it either, but they welcome it. I think from a world perspective, it's been a little bit of a challenge for them to be back in the States where a lot of teenagers are thinking about what their next shoes they need to buy are or whether they have the right genes or not, and that's not true for either of our kids. And I think from a world perspective, they can say, yeah, I've seen need. And I know what it looks like, and some of these things look like need. Some of these things people say are need, they're not needs, they're wants.
You know, you mentioned that your kids are always watching you. How do you think they'll reflect one day on a mom and dad who took big risks for the kingdom?
Say that again?
How do you think they'll reflect one day on a mom and a dad who took big risks for the kingdom of God?
Yeah, do you want to?
I think our prayer is that they would hopefully also say, well, my mom and dad did this.
Absolutely.
I can do this too. And I really, we see that they're 17 and 19 now, and we see that in them, that willingness to obey and to trust the Lord for whatever their journey may be, understanding that there's sacrifice along the way. They may end up in Africa, they may stay in Ohio. We don't know, that's a God thing. But I think that they've seen it lived out in a very up close and personal way, and we pray and believe and are trusting that that will have big impact for their future and what God has for them.
You know, we often tell our kids, if we've modeled a comfortable Christianity to you, we've not modeled the right Christianity. So I admire what you guys have done and are doing. And, you know, a little bit off the subject, but I'm a big fan of PAX. And you got to give us 2 minutes on what PAX is.
Yeah, great. Happy to do it. So now my full-time role back here in the States is to oversee surgical training and discipleship program. That's what I was a part of in Gabon. There's now 12 sites that we have that we do training, 123 residents, and it's training African physicians to become surgeons and fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. So they're Christians when they come to us, and those Christians that I trained, I think taught me more about Christianity than I taught them about Christianity. I learned a lot from those men and women that I worked with. But it's a training and discipleship program, surgery, throughout, like I mentioned, 12 different sites, 9 different countries across Africa, one in Egypt and then sub-Saharan Africa.
So you've trained almost 300, are training or have trained almost 300 surgeons.
And that's right. So 123 in training and 126, so close to that 300 number that have graduated. And they're across Africa, 21 different countries. God is using them in crazy, immense, huge ways for the kingdom.
And we've had a couple of them speak here. Agneta Odura spoke here, and Jacques spoke as well. So, Chuck, I think you have a question?
Yeah, in fact, we have a couple, and they're a little bit related, actually. One, it says, in the U.S., we're obsessed with safety for obvious reasons and for good reason. How do you respond to people who ask about raising kids overseas when they ask the question, is it safe?
Go ahead.
No.
Right?
But is life safe? Right? The only thing we know is that we're eventually going to die. That we know. We're going to physically leave this earth. And so the question isn't, is it, I understand the question, and I don't want to downplay the question of is it safe. But I will say that the risks are different, much like the tensions are different. We didn't have risks that our kids were going to get into things at school because they weren't going to a school at that time. They were homeschooled. We didn't have risks about the culture. There wasn't internet risks. There weren't things that they were going to get exposed to. So the risks are different, and you have to address those risks appropriately. Did we let them go out? Yes. I think our daughter ran into more snakes than the rest of the family put together. I don't know why that was. By herself, yes, by herself. But God protected her through all of those times where she was exposed or at risk with a snake right in front of her. And as we say in Gabon, we think they're all poisonous, but it doesn't really matter because they all can have a machete that takes care of them. And so that's the approach. So in terms of risks and safety, I don't think God calls us to safety. He calls us to do something, and it's not often to be safe. That's often us wanting to be what we think is safe.
Yeah, I think, and this is a little bit of a follow-up, it actually comes from one of our audience members right here with us tonight. What was actually the hardest thing for your kids when you actually made that move? Were there obvious challenges for some or all of your kids?
Moving where?
Moving to Gabon or moving back? Because for us, they both were challenges.
Well, both. Actually, maybe talk about both because there are different challenges. Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh,
I would say moving there, they were so young, they were 2 and 4. As Sarah said, that was just normal for them and they didn't know anything else. So they were just raised in this hot, humid, beautiful, dangerous tropical jungle, and again, that was normal for them. We did come back and raise support and speak at different churches here in the States. They got a little taste of things that they were maybe missing out on, but then they were ready to get back to house 4 in the middle of the jungle. We all were, and be a family again and do the ministry that God had called us to do. And then moving from Gabon to the U.S., I don't even know where to begin. There were a lot of challenges, and just everything was overwhelming, I would say, for the kids and for us. And nothing felt normal or familiar at that time. School was a big school, backpacks, lockers, teachers. There was just a lot of nuances that were, and most people don't know where Gabon is, so that was also a story. Oh, where did you move from? Oh, we moved from Gabon. Oh, they didn't know it was even in Africa, and that's normal. But so that engaging kind of relationship, they couldn't say, well, I just moved here from Houston, or I moved from Pittsburgh. They couldn't say that because they moved from Gabon.
Yeah.
I think I would add, just in moving to Africa, one of the things that was a challenge was just a bit of loneliness for us and for the kids. In some ways that was a tension, but then became a positive because we become a close family. And so we spent lots of time together. We were our kids' playmates, as well as their parents, their disciplinarians, you name it, that's what we were for them. And there are a variety of reasons for that. But in our situation, that's what it was. And so I think the fear or concern about were they going to be lonely, or maybe they were lonely at times, maybe they didn't know it, but they were. And so we could fill those gaps. That becomes a challenge as parents, but it also puts you so tight together as a family, things that we really cherish today.
Yeah, maybe time for one more question for you both. And by the way, this is from Emily. She said, your talk was so good and it was so encouraging. She said, can you give some encouragement for young married couples or maybe even students that are watching tonight to say yes to God early?
I can say the encouragement would be give it a try, give it a whirl. There's a lot of ways to engage in a 2-month trip, a 2-year trip. You don't have to commit for a lifetime, but it's worth the try. It's worth the risk. And today with internet, with travel, things are a lot easier than they were 50 years ago when there wasn't that easy access to internet and travel. So go for it and pray along the way, get wise mentors, as Keir mentioned already, but really that group here in the US that can support you in prayer, can email you, can Skype or WhatsApp with you is critical to the success and the foundation and the rootedness that you can feel when you do go overseas.
I would just add a couple of things to that. One would be start now. It's never too early. You can't start the journey too early. So start seeking out people now that are on that journey. And then along your journey, God will open the doors and prevent yourself from making decisions that will hinder you from accomplishing what you think God's called you to. So if you've called overseas, probably buying a house is a bad idea. Maybe not, but usually something like that that's going to tie you down. Or if you're in a relationship and God's called you overseas and your maybe future spouse says, I would never go overseas, you need to say, Lord, where am I supposed to go with this? So don't make decisions that will prevent you. There's a lot of other ways to make decisions that leave the doors open.
Good, yeah, so good.
Dr. Paul, Jennifer, anything else from you before we let them?
That was very insightful. Thank you.
Happy to be here.